Hey everyone, Claire Sterling here. When Elon Musk moved Tesla out of California, the political class dismissed it as one billionaire's ego. Then Oracle left. Then Charles Schwab left. At what point does a pattern stop being a coincidence and start being a verdict? I want you to hold that question in your mind for the entire length of this video, because by the time we reach the end, you will have a very clear answer, and that answer is not going to come from me. It is going to come from the data, from the numbers, from the decisions that some of the most sophisticated financial minds in the world have already made with their own capital and their own companies. And those decisions taken together tell a story about California that the state's political leadership has been refusing to tell for years. Stay with me until the very end, because the final revelation in this video is something that I have not seen covered anywhere in the mainstream press. And when you understand it fully, it reframes everything you thought you knew about what is happening to the American economy right now. Let me start at the beginning, because to understand where California is today, you need to understand what California used to be. And the distance between those two things is the real story. 30 years ago, California was not just a state, it was an idea. It was proof that the American dream had a geographic address. You went to California to build something new, to start something that had never existed before, to find people who were as ambitious and as crazy and as relentless as you were. The weather was perfect, the universities were world-class, the talent was everywhere, and the culture, that particular California culture of optimism and disruption and move fast and break things, that culture was genuinely magnetic. It pulled the best minds in the world toward it like gravity. Silicon Valley was not just a marketing term, it was a genuine ecosystem, a concentration of human talent and risk capital and technical knowledge that had no parallel anywhere on the planet. Apple, Google, Facebook, Netflix, Tesla, Salesforce, Adobe, NVIDIA. The list goes on and on. These were not companies that happened to be located in California. They were companies that could only have been created in California because California, at its peak, had something that no other place on Earth could replicate. That something was a combination of talent, capital, culture, and institutional infrastructure that had taken decades to build, and that functioned as a self-reinforcing engine of innovation. That engine is now sputtering, and the departures of Tesla, Oracle, and Charles Schwab are not the cause of the problem. They are the symptoms of something that has been building for a long time, something that California's political leadership has been choosing not to see, or choosing not to acknowledge, which, at this point, amounts to the same thing. Let me walk you through what actually happened, because the sequence matters, the timing matters, and the reasons each company gave, when you line them up side by side, tell a story that is more coherent and more damning than any single departure could tell on its own. Start with Tesla. November 2021. Elon Musk announces that Tesla is relocating its global headquarters from Palo Alto, California, to Austin, Texas. This was, at the time, treated by most of the mainstream press as a personal decision by an eccentric billionaire. Musk had been publicly feuding with California officials over COVID lockdown restrictions. He had threatened to move before. Many commentators assumed it was performance, posturing, Musk being Musk. It was not posturing. Tesla moved. The headquarters relocated to Austin. The massive new gigafactory that Musk had been planning, the one that was going to be the largest manufacturing facility in the Western Hemisphere, was built in Texas, not California. And when Musk explained his reasoning, he cited two things above everything else: taxes and housing costs. He said California had become too expensive for working and middle-class employees to afford to live anywhere near where they worked. He said the state's regulatory environment made it harder, slower, and more expensive to build and manufacture than competing locations. He said Texas offered a fundamentally more rational environment for a company trying to scale at the speed Tesla needed to scale. California's political class responded to this the way it has responded to almost every major corporate departure in the last decade. They minimized it. They mocked it. Several prominent politicians made jokes about Musk's personality. One state legislator said good riddance. The message from Sacramento was clear. California does not need Tesla. California is bigger than any one company. California is fine. And then Oracle left. December 2021. Just weeks after Tesla's announcement, Oracle Corporation, one of the most powerful enterprise software companies in the world, announces it is relocating its headquarters from Redwood City, California, to Austin, Texas. Oracle had been in California since 1977, 44 years. The company that Larry Ellison built from a single idea in a rented office in Santa Clara into a $200 billion global technology giant, packing up and leaving the state where it was born. Oracle cited high costs and the need for operational flexibility in its official statement. But in separate interviews, company executives were more direct. California's tax environment was unsustainable for a company of Oracle's size. The cost of housing made it increasingly difficult to attract and retain talent. And Texas was offering something California was not, a government that actively wanted them there. Still, California's political response was muted. Oracle was not a consumer brand the way Tesla was. The departure did not generate the same cultural moment. And so the narrative managers in Sacramento were able to contain the damage. Another outlier, another ego-driven decision. California's resilient. California bounces back. California's fine. And then Charles Schwab left. This one was different. This one was harder to dismiss. Because Charles Schwab is not a tech company driven by a flamboyant founder with a Twitter account. Charles Schwab is a financial services institution. It manages trillions of dollars in client assets. It employs tens of thousands of people. It is, in every meaningful sense, the kind of establishment corporate presence that a state's economic ecosystem depends on. Not a disruptor, not a provocateur, a pillar. Charles Schwab announced it was relocating its headquarters from San Francisco to Westlake, Texas. The company had been headquartered in San Francisco since 1971. 50 years of history, gone. And the reasons Schwab gave were not vague. They were specific and they were devastating. The cost of doing business in California had become prohibitive. The tax burden was unsustainable. The quality of life in San Francisco, the city that had been the company's home for half a century, had deteriorated to the point where it was actively making it harder to recruit and retain employees. That last point deserves to sit with you for a moment, because it is not an abstract fiscal argument. It is a human one. Charles Schwab, a company with the resources to locate anywhere on Earth, looked at San Francisco and concluded that the city had become a place where it was difficult to convince talented people to live. That is not a tax story. That is a civilization story. And it is one of the most damning indictments of California's governance that I have ever encountered. Now here is where it gets dangerous. Tesla, Oracle, Charles Schwab, those are the names you know. Those are the departures that made headlines. But they are not the full picture, not even close. Because for every Tesla that generates a news cycle when it leaves, there are dozens of smaller companies that leave quietly, without press releases, without Elon Musk tweets, without anyone in Sacramento feeling the need to respond. The Hoover Institution at Stanford University, which is located in California and therefore has no particular incentive to paint the state in a negative light, conducted a study that found California had lost more Fortune 1000 corporate headquarters than any other state in the country over the past decade. More than any other state. The state that was once the undisputed capital of American corporate ambition is now leading the nation in corporate departures. That is not a talking point. That is a measurement. And here's the number that I want you to hold on to as we go deeper into this story. California's combined state and local tax burden for high earners reaches approximately 13.3% at the state level alone. Add federal taxes, and a high-earning Californian is already paying more than 50 cents of every dollar to the government before they spend a single dollar on their business, their employees, their family, or their future. Now compare that to Texas. 0 state income tax. Compare it to Florida. 0 state income tax. Compare it to Nevada. 0 state income tax. The gap is not marginal. It is not the kind of gap you rationalize away because you love the weather and the culture. At sufficient scale, that gap becomes mathematically impossible to ignore. And the CEOs and CFOs and founders who are making headquarters decisions are, by definition, operating at sufficient scale. But here is something that almost nobody is talking about, and this is the part that should scare you. The companies that have left California are not the ones that were struggling. They are not the ones that were failing. Tesla, Oracle, Charles Schwab, these are successful companies, profitable companies, companies with options. And when successful, profitable companies with options choose to leave, it tells you something very specific about the environment they are leaving. It tells you that the environment has become hostile enough that even success cannot overcome it. That is a very different and much more alarming signal than companies leaving because they are in trouble. Think about what that means for the companies that are still in California, the ones that have not yet left. Every one of them is running the same calculation that Tesla ran in 2021. Every CFO in Silicon Valley has a spreadsheet somewhere that compares the cost of operating in California to the cost of operating in Texas or Florida or Arizona. And every quarter that California raises taxes or increases regulations or makes it harder to build or hire or grow, that spreadsheet tips slightly further in the direction of departure. The question is not whether more companies will leave California. The question is when, and what the trigger will be, and what California will look like when the next wave of departures comes. Let me talk about something that the departure headlines never capture: the talent migration. Because the companies are following the talent, and the talent is following something even more fundamental than tax rates. The talent is following livability. San Francisco, the city that was once the undisputed capital of the global technology industry, is experiencing something that would have seemed impossible 15 years ago. Its downtown commercial vacancy rate has reached historic highs. Flagship retail stores that were San Francisco institutions, Nordstrom, Whole Foods, Westfield Mall, have closed their downtown locations, citing safety concerns and declining foot traffic. The city's population has fallen for 4 consecutive years, and the net migration data tells a story that is as clear as any corporate headquarters announcement. The people who are leaving San Francisco are disproportionately the young, the educated, and the high-earning. The people who are staying are disproportionately the people who have no choice but to stay. That demographic shift is catastrophic for a city's long-term fiscal health, because the people who are leaving are the ones who generate the tax revenue that funds the services that everyone depends on, and the people who are staying are more likely to be net recipients of those services than net contributors to them. This is not a moral judgment. It is a mathematical observation. And the math, right now, is pointing in a very bad direction. Here's a story I want you to sit with, because it makes this real in a way that tax rate comparisons cannot. I want to tell you about a woman I will call Jennifer. Jennifer spent 12 years building a software startup in San Francisco. She raised venture capital. She hired a team of 23 people. She built a product that had real customers and real revenue. She was, by any reasonable measure, a success story. Exactly the kind of entrepreneur that California's innovation economy depends on. 3 years ago, Jennifer moved her company to Austin. Not because she wanted to. She had deep roots in San Francisco. Her network was there. Her investors were there. Her first employees were there. But she had watched 3 of her senior engineers leave the city in the same year, each citing the same reasons. They could not afford to buy homes anywhere near the office. Their partners felt unsafe walking home at night. The schools they wanted for their children were not accessible to them without either an enormous financial sacrifice or a commute that made work-life balance impossible. Jennifer did the math. She could fight to retain talent in a city that was making her talents' lives harder every year, or she could move to a city that was making her talents' lives easier. She moved. Today, Jennifer's company is in Austin. She has 41 employees. 12 of her original San Francisco team made the move with her. She has hired 29 additional people in Texas. Her cost structure is lower. Her employee retention is higher. And when I asked her if she would ever consider moving back to California, her answer was immediate. No, not because of the taxes, not even primarily because of the taxes. Because the people she needs to hire do not want to live there anymore. And that, she said, is not a problem you solve with a tax credit. Jennifer's story is not unique. It is the story of hundreds of founders and executives who have made the same calculation over the past 5 years. And each one of them, when they leave, takes something with them that cannot easily be replaced. Not just jobs, not just tax revenue, institutional knowledge, networks, the kind of embedded relationships and informal connections that make an innovation ecosystem function. Silicon Valley was not built by policies. It was built by people who knew each other and trusted each other and funded each other and hired each other's former employees and showed up at the same conferences and the same coffee shops and the same board meetings over decades. That social infrastructure is what made it irreplaceable, and it is dissolving, one Jennifer at a time. Now let me talk about Gavin Newsom, because you cannot tell this story honestly without talking about California's governor. And I want to be precise about this, because it is easy to make this a simple political narrative, and this story is more complicated than that. Gavin Newsom is not stupid. He is not ignorant of the data. He is not unaware that Tesla left, that Oracle left, that Charles Schwab left, that the commercial vacancy rate in San Francisco is historically high, that the state's net migration has been negative for multiple consecutive years. He knows all of this. And yet the policy direction from Sacramento has not meaningfully changed in response to any of it. Why? That is the question I have been sitting with for months, and I think the answer is more revealing than any individual policy decision. The answer is that the political coalition that keeps Gavin Newsom in power does not primarily consist of the CEOs and the founders and the high earners who are leaving. It consists of the public sector unions, the progressive activists, the tenants' rights organizations, the environmental advocacy groups, and the urban voters who have decided that the departing corporations are not the victims of California's policies, but the cause of California's problems. Within that political framework, every corporate departure is not a warning. It is a validation. It is evidence that the powerful are being held accountable, that the system is working as intended. And this is the deepest and most dangerous dimension of California's crisis, because it means that the political feedback loop that would normally correct a policy error is broken. In a functioning political system, when your policies cause visible harm, you change your policies. But if your political coalition interprets that harm as success, the incentive to change disappears. And that is, as best I can tell, where California is right now. Here is where it gets darker. California has the highest poverty rate of any American state when you adjust for cost of living. The state that has generated more billionaires than almost any other jurisdiction on earth also has more people living in poverty by the cost of living adjusted measure than Mississippi, than Alabama, than West Virginia, the states that California's political class looks down on as economic backwaters. Think about what that means. The most progressive large state in America, the state that has implemented every policy that the left advocates for, has a poverty rate that rivals the states it considers the most backward in the country. That is not a coincidence, and it is not a paradox. It is the logical outcome of policies that drive up the cost of housing, the cost of energy, the cost of doing business, and the cost of living, while simultaneously reducing the supply of jobs and economic opportunity through excessive regulation and taxation. The wealthy can afford California, the poor are trapped in California, the middle class leaves California, and that is exactly the distribution you would predict if you set out deliberately to design a system that concentrates poverty while dispersing prosperity. The corporations that have left are not the cause of this. They are the ones who saw it clearly enough to act on it. Now let me give you the number that reframes everything. California has lost an estimated $340 billion in adjusted gross income to outmigration over the past decade. $340 billion. That is taxable income that was generated in California, that California's government built its budget projections around, that California's service workers and restaurant owners and small business operators depended on, that simply no longer exists within California's borders. It moved to Texas, to Florida, to Arizona, to Nevada, to Tennessee, to states that were willing to create the conditions that California was not. $340 billion. Let me help you feel that number. California's entire annual state budget is approximately $300 billion, which means the state has lost more than a full year's worth of its own budget in departing income over the past decade. And that loss is not a one-time event. It is a recurring annual drain because the people and companies that have left are not coming back. They are generating their income and paying their taxes somewhere else every year, permanently. And here is the truly frightening part of that number. The $340 billion is the income that left. It does not capture the multiplier effect. Every dollar of high-earning income that leaves a local economy removes approximately $3 to $4 of total economic activity when you account for the spending that income would have generated, the jobs it would have supported, the businesses it would have sustained. The true economic cost of California's outmigration is not $340 billion. It is somewhere between $1 and $1.4 trillion in lost economic activity over the past decade. $1 trillion, leaving the state that was supposed to be the future. I want to talk about something that has not gotten nearly enough attention in the coverage of California's corporate departures. The secondary migration, the invisible exodus, because for every Tesla or Oracle that makes headlines when it leaves, there are thousands of individuals, small business owners, independent contractors, successful professionals, who make the same calculation and the same decision entirely below the radar of the financial press. I have spoken to dozens of people who have left California in the past 3 years. Not famous people, not billionaires, dentists, real estate agents, software engineers, restaurant owners, a family therapist who moved to Nevada, a structural engineer who moved to Texas, a woman who ran a successful catering company in Los Angeles and relocated to Scottsdale, Arizona. Every single one of them cited the same combination of factors: taxes, cost of living, safety, and a sense that the state's political direction was not changing and was not going to change. college, and every single one of them said the same thing when I asked if they planned to return. They looked at me like I had asked if they planned to set their money on fire. That sentiment, multiplied across hundreds of thousands of individual decisions, is what $340 billion in departing income actually looks like from the ground level. It is not a corporate board decision. It is a million small decisions made by a million people who ran the numbers and decided that California was no longer the best answer to the question of where to build a life. Here is something I find genuinely remarkable about this moment, and it is something that the traditional political framing of this story completely misses. The states that are gaining what California is losing are not the ones offering a worse quality of life. They are not asking people to sacrifice safety or education or opportunity in exchange for lower taxes. Texas has world-class universities. Florida has some of the fastest-growing cities in the country. Arizona has a booming technology sector. The people moving from California to these states are not downgrading their lives. In many cases, they are upgrading them. More house for less money. Better schools that are actually accessible without a six-figure income. Cities where they feel safe walking outside at night. Communities that are growing and optimistic rather than shrinking and defensive. That is the part that should keep California's political leadership awake at night. Because if the competition were between California's quality of life and a worse quality of life elsewhere, the calculation would be different. But that is not the competition anymore. The competition is between California's quality of life at California's price and Texas's quality of life at Texas's price. And for an increasing number of people, that comparison is not close. So here is the billion-dollar question, the one I promised you at the beginning of this video. Is California's corporate exodus a temporary adjustment that the state will work through? Or is it the beginning of a structural realignment in where American economic power is located? A realignment that, once it reaches a certain point, becomes self-reinforcing and irreversible? California has come back before. The university system remains among the best in the world. The weather, the culture, the creative industries, the network effects built over decades. Those things are real and they matter. But here is the pessimistic case. And right now, it is backed by more current data than the optimistic one. The political feedback loop is broken. The people who have the most to gain from policy change are the people who are leaving. The people who are staying are either unable to leave or ideologically committed to the current direction. That combination is not a recipe for reform. It is a recipe for entrenchment. And entrenchment, in the context of a fiscal crisis driven by capital flight, is not a stable equilibrium. It is a countdown. Tesla read the signals in 2021. Oracle read them at the same time. Charles Schwab read them a year later. And every entrepreneur, every skilled worker, every CFO still in California is now asking the same question those companies asked before they made their decisions. How much longer do I stay? And what do I lose by waiting? Tesla, Oracle, Charles Schwab. 3 names, 3 verdicts, 1 state, 1 question. At what point does a pattern stop being a coincidence and start being a verdict? I think we are already there. I'm Claire Sterling. I'll see you in the next one.